Welcome to the inaugural Ultra Football Technical Area discussion. And what a time to be alive as an Australian football fan. Socceroos qualifying for the World Cup. We're hosting a World Cup in 12 months' time. First time that we'll have some clear air post-COVID with both of our A-Leagues competitions, men's and women's, and we've never had more people playing the game than we do have now. So really big 12 months coming up, and we want to really touch on the present but also the future of football. And we've got three really deep thinkers and three people who bring something different from their perspective. And we're starting with the man that's helped us secure World Cup qualification. And he also got promoted into the championship this season. What a couple of months for you, Bailey Wright. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Cheers, guys.
How do you feel? You must be on cloud nine.
Yeah, I think it's not till you reflect a little bit on what you've achieved and it starts to hit you, but it has been a crazy few months. It's crazy how football can change from the start of the season to 12 months' time from where we are now. It's been incredible. I'm still pinching myself really of what's happened.
We're chatting before. I mean, if you had have lost the playoff and had have lost the penalty shootout, it'd be a pretty different vibe the last couple of weeks, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it was. When you go into those games, all you think of is it being successful, and obviously it has done. But on the flip side, there's always a loser, and I'm glad wasn't a loser, because it would have been a horrible summer. I know it's winter here, but summer for me, being from the UK or living in the UK, it would have been a horrible off-season. Where you might be thinking of where your future is next year and where Australia's football future might lie, with so much responsibility in that game. So, it could have been completely the opposite experience, but it's been really positive, and one I'll remember this for forever.
My sources tell me you played a really, really big role on and off the field in that Peru win. More on that in a moment. Emma Checker, Melbourne City skipper and Matilda, no less. Thanks for joining us. How are you going?
Going well, thanks. How are you?
Going well. How did you go watching the Socceroos the other week?
Oh, I mean, I think every Australian, whether or not they're a football fan, is just absolutely through it. It's a huge result, and I'm very pleased to be an Aussie and proud of their efforts.
Yeah, big year coming up for you and the Matildas, and we'll touch on that in a moment. We'll touch on the women's game, Matildas' future of women's football, A-League women's also. But I want to introduce the final member of the panel, a man who's had his tentacles all over Australian football, head of football at Melbourne Victory at the moment. He's also an author, Football Belongs, and an award-winning podcaster, John Didulica. Welcome.
Thanks, David.
You're excited to be here.
I am. No, I'm excited to be alongside these two wonderful people next to me, Emma and Bailey. Not only are they great players, but as David said, they're really deep thinkers and the sorts of athletes that I think will shape the next generation of society, but also of our game.
And you're a Ted Lasso fan by the looks of things?
Lasso fan, if people see my top. AFC Richmond. Roy Kent at the back. I'm convinced that Roy Kent is a cross between, not even a cross, it's Australia's version of Roy Kent is Mila Jedinak. And I'm committed to that.
Yeah, it's a very good analogy. All right, let's take it back to Peru. Back to you, Bailey. We've got to start with that. It's newsy, it's topical. Just a really extraordinary night, or an extraordinary morning for those of us who got up here. No doubt your family did also, but take us back to that game and what it was like from your point of view.
Yeah, it was, quite humbling to be part of games that important. I've always said when you're a footballer, you want to play in games of importance and games you remember, and those memories you make, no one will ever take them away from you. So having experienced a qualifying campaign and beating Honduras 4 years ago makes you more hungry for wanting to achieve it again, and you know what's at stake going into the game. You've got a group of young lads who are there for the first time, senior lads that have been there and done it, and coaching staff that have done it, some that haven't. So you've got a real group of people that are hungry for success and can share different stories and I guess, different points to how we can get through the game. So we had a real togetherness, a strong togetherness of staff and players going into that game, and we knew how important it was, and we knew to play the game, not necessarily the occasion, because there was a lot at stake. I think we all know. A lot of people did write us off and didn't expect us to get the job done, but there wasn't one person in that room who didn't believe that we couldn't do it. So there we were in a penalty shootout with big Redders making the headlines, and you're buzzing for him as a bloke. He's a great guy, and that was his moment. And I think to a man and everyone involved, it was a great occasion, and like I said, one memory that will live with us for a long time.
Just smirk. I remember seeing your post-game interview. Was it put in your pipe and smoke it?
Yeah, I was pretty pumped after that, after the game, and there was a bit of criticism aimed towards us, and sometimes, I'm not going to lie, criticism fuels you, and you do need it. It's a big part of professional football now. It's a big part of life. Social media and the expectations that are on you representing your country. I guess it's a privilege to have those criticisms. But at the same time, sometimes it's not warranted, and sometimes the way it comes across, it can be a bit crap. But that's the world we live in now. You've got to be tough-skinned, and you've got to be able to adapt and deal with it. And I think that comment from myself wasn't necessarily just on behalf of me. It was on behalf of us as a group. We sort of created an internal expectation to sort of, there's a lot of support around, which was brilliant, not just inside the camp, but externally. But to sort of create our own buzz, our own set of values as a group that we relied on and not external. And that's sort of where that come from. It just come out, I think.
That was good. Keep it up. I love it. My mail is that yourself, Matty Ryan and Jackson Irvine really took a lead going into that game, and there was meetings that took place behind the scenes where you guys spoke about what this meant to Australian football, the bigger picture. Can you confirm that? And can you just elaborate on what was said, if true?
Yeah, I guess we have a bit of a leadership group that Arnie's put together, and there were several other lads in as well. We had Lex, Azza, Aziz, obviously Matty, Jacko, I hope I'm not missing anyone there. Sains as well, and we all sort of shared different views of what we felt we needed. We all complemented each other really well in terms of different leadership styles. We had different strengths and weaknesses, which we all knew. And I think when you come together and have those chats with Arnie and all of us, they were open discussions of what we felt as a group we wanted to drive, what message we wanted to send to the group, and just basically holding each other accountable for what we want to achieve and the standards that were set day in, day out on the training pitch and around the hotel. And, Matty's been a brilliant captain and led a lot of those discussions. And the day before games, he really pulled everyone together and sort of shared his views on what it means going into this next game from UAE to then Peru. So it was sort of galvanised us as a group. We set standards. Training was hard. Like, we just set standards in training to really push each other and get a little bit more aggression and a bit more ruthlessness out of each other. And I guess my nature is I'm sort of naturally like that. So it was kind of easy for me just to sort of be there as someone to support Matty in the captain's role for him, because he's been brilliant and really drove us on, and leadership from him really shouldn't be underestimated. I thought he was brilliant.
Yeah, very good. I've heard that also, and big from you as well, because you weren't part of every camp. So good on you for really stepping up and taking on that leadership role. Just on Redders, the the big moment of that game, we just had a quick chat and talking about how it unfolded, and it almost didn't happen. Can you just tell us about how that substitution unfolded from your point of view?
Yeah, obviously Arnie and the coaching staff had their plans for the game. When you're in the moment playing the game, you're just focusing on winning or getting to extra time penalties, as we did. And the game became really slow. And I remember Jacko coming over to me and saying, if you see Redders stood by the side of the pitch, get the ball out of play because we need to make the sub. And I remember thinking, what's he on about? Like, you're just in the zone playing the game, mentally, physically fatigued. Jacko's going down with cramp, people are cramping, and the next minute the substitute happens, but naturally the ball goes out of play. And then you're sort of looking around, obviously Matty goes off and Redders comes on, and then you sort of click that we're pretty close to penalties here, because you are so absorbed in the game. It's a real difficult experience to explain when everything's going on and you're trying to keep a cool, calm head when there's just chaos, I guess, everywhere. And that was one of their moments. It was just, had the ball not gone out of play, we didn't get Redders on. Who knows what might have been, but I'm sure Matty still would have been a hero. But the way it worked out, buzzing for Redders.
And you had no inkling whatsoever?
Not a clue, no. We obviously practiced penalties during the week, and all three keepers, we're blessed with incredible, well, the keepers are a joke. There was a lot of pens getting saved. I won't say who. One of mine did get saved by Matty, but I'm not a great pen taker. So
what number were you?
I was number 8. I'm just glad it didn't get to me because I did not fancy myself. But no, so it was one of those things that was completely, we didn't have a clue. I don't even know if Redders even knew it was going to happen, but I know he was doing his homework to make sure he was ready. And I guess that was a credit to anyone, starting or not. We were all ready to play our part, whether that be on the pitch or off the pitch, and everyone was ready.
Yeah, fantastic. Emma, I guess when you listen to all of that and you've been there for the Matildas, 8 caps, hopefully many more to come, including the World Cup next year. Yeah, how does it make you feel, and how important was that moment for Australian football?
Oh, I think it's huge for Australian football, and I think it's, with the timing of the Men's World Cup later in the year at a time where, like we've spoken about, it's when kids are starting to sign up to play club football for the following year. I think it's a really important time to get participation numbers up, and the exciting thing about that is it then feeds into when the Women's World Cup is. So I think they're both timed really perfectly in that sense, and they do feed into each other, and I think this is probably one of the biggest 12 months for football in Australia that we may ever have, with the men now qualifying and the home World Cup. So it's a time that we really need to leverage and utilise, because it can be a really big turning point for football in Australia.
And a lot of it has been driven by the PFA with the equal pay and whatnot, but there is a really close connection and synergy between the Matildas and the Socceroos, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, obviously, like you said, those negotiations that have been happening, particularly in more recent times, have been much more aligned. And I think, we've also now seen that with the structure of the A-League, that there is a lot more unity. And I think, again, that's really important leading into both World Cups, is that there is that real unity across not only the national teams, but also the leagues. And it creates a stronger bond for football in Australia.
Mm-hmm. JD? You had you've worked with a lot of the players in that Socceroos camp, including Andrew Redmayne. So feel free to touch on any, I guess, personal experiences and how you felt. But beyond that, what does it also mean for Australian football qualification?
I think Emma's 100% right. We've got this incredible convergence of events over the next 12 months that can set the game up for the next generation. If you go back to, I'm a football historian, David. If you go back to, say, 2001, 2002, they were the real tipping point years for Major League Soccer. They had the World Cup in 94. They'd sort of had a spike, but by 2001, it was sort of going backwards. And a few key things happened at that time. One was the rationalisation of ownership. Mm-hmm. So a few club owners took real strong control of the direction of the league. They again reinvested in players to bring really high quality footballers into the league. But what also happened was the US did really well at the 2002 World Cup. So they went to the quarterfinals, from memory, pushed Germany all the way from memory. But they made the quarters, maybe lost to someone else, but they did incredibly well. And that created this huge groundswell of support for the game, and now they've had 20 years of incredible growth. And we're sort of in a similar moment here in Australia now, where for the first time, as you said, we've got club owners who are dictating the future of the league. They've got their first clean air after years of COVID. We've got a Men's World Cup to look forward to, and that's significant for so many reasons, because it demonstrated to so many people how good Australian footballers can be, how good Australian coaches can be. And that's consistently what we hear, is that Australia's not good enough, we're this, we're that. And Bailey's frustration in the post-match interview was speaking to all of those sorts of issues, that We don't value the people that we have, and somebody else is always better. We played Peru off the park. You know, everyone forgets that. It's not like we just won a lucky penalty shootout. We were the only team really in that game, in my view. And same with UAE. So we deserve to be there against a team that finished 5th in South America. We've had Man United are coming in a few weeks. We've had Barcelona last month. We've got Aston Villa coming. So there's these huge events. And then that leads into a World Cup in November, and that leads into the Women's World Cup next July. So you're never going to have these series of opportunities again in our lifetime. So we've really got to make the most of it in this next window.
You've worked really closely with pretty much most of this squad. You were with the PFA for a number of years, and it was a really challenging period at the start, but you made some great inroads during that period. Can you just talk to this group of players, whether it's individuals or collectively, and
I think
how
Bailey,
special they
I
are?
think Bailey can probably speak to it more than I can. I tended to observe it from the outside. But there's individuals within that group who are just incredible people. And I think some of that gets handed down to the next group. So Bailey's, 28 now? 29. But you got to spend 4, 5, 6 years in the national team with someone like Mile Jedinak. And Mile is an incredible person, like absolutely incredible. But Mile got to spend a lot of time in the national teams with maybe someone like Tim Cahill or Tony Popovich or whoever. So you've got a really powerful legacy that's been built by so many wonderful footballers who can then hand that over to the next group of leaders. And to see Bailey step up, Matty Ryan, Andrew Redmayne, these are wonderful, wonderful people. And they're genuine ambassadors for the game. They love the sport. They want to see it succeed. And to have that baton handed from one group to the next so seamlessly every 4 years is incredible, and we underrate that. How many countries have made the last 5 World Cups? Not many, and we've done it. And I recall one incident that speaks to this sort of synergy between the two teams. I was at the World Cup in 2019 in France, and after we beat Brazil 3-2, which for me was still one of the greatest ever matches that I've been to, down 2-0, and we ended up beating Brazil 3-2. And I remember seeing Sam Kerr and a couple of other players on the pitch, and they're looking up in the stands, and the person they were really aiming for was Mark Milligan. And Mark Milligan was standing next to me, and they were just looking up in the stands, waving furiously at Mark, trying to get his attention and just to say hi. And that just showed that synergy that exists between these players. So we should be really excited with the national teams that we have, and they're unlike any other teams, sporting teams in this country.
Brilliant. Bailey, I'll bring it back to you. World Cups, it's an interesting one for you. You've qualified for a couple now. You've only been to one, but you haven't played yet at a FIFA World Cup. Can you just talk to us about the heartache of missing out 4 years ago?
Yeah, I was part of the group that went through the campaign of qualifying for Russia, and that was a tough campaign. And obviously qualifying is the way we did against Honduras, and playing at Sydney in front of friends and family was special. And I guess when you're part of a campaign like that, you could say complacency can sometimes creep in, and I thought I was a good chance of making the squad for Russia, and I guess I felt I deserved to make the squad. And obviously there was at the time Ange obviously left, and Bert van Marwijk came in as manager, and I guess I just wasn't his cup of tea. I'd like to I still would have backed myself had I been selected, but it was quite tough for me to, I was sat there on holiday, fully expecting a phone call or an email to sort of make a 30-man squad for the World Cup that would have been cut down to 23, and my phone didn't ring, didn't get an email. And I was like, I'm sure today's the day that, you always know the day that you're going to find out about the squad, because it's always like, no matter how long or how many times you play for Australia, whenever you know the day is coming of squad selection, you're itching to see if you've made it or not. And that's the way it should be. You should never take it for granted, and you should always be buzzing to get any chance to represent your country. And I was buzzing to have that chance to represent Australia at the World Cup in Russia, and I didn't get the phone call, didn't get an email, and it was actually Joel Freem, who's absolute great bloke, bit of a legend as well, and team manager Joel, and everyone loves him. And I remember him calling me thinking, I could just hear the tone in his voice straight away. He's like, mate, I'm so sorry. I have to be the one to tell you you've not made the 30-man squad. And that was it. I was like, all right, no worries. See you later. So obviously that was just short and sharp. I didn't really want to talk. And that's why I found out. The most disappointing bit for me was not one coaching staff member or anyone. All the staff got in touch with me, the ones who'd been down the journey. All the new staff come in. I guess it was just they were there, wanted to do well for the World Cup. And unfortunately for me, I was one of the ones that just wasn't part of the plans. And if anything, that sort of highlights that you never know when the last chance to represent Australia might come, and nothing's guaranteed. So it hit me hard. It affected me for quite a bit for the summer. I still supported the boys. I was the number one fan. If anything, I took a lot of satisfaction. I still do now of being part of that group that qualified, because it was a tough campaign. And when you reflect on things and you still look at your achievements, I still feel enormously proud to have been part of that group that qualified, although gutted that I didn't go to that World Cup. And I sort of said, I'll use this to fuel me, to make sure that, makes me hungrier to want to get back and represent Australia and qualify for another World Cup. And I certainly used those disappointments to my advantage, certainly in the last few weeks when, I've not paid a lot for Australia in the last 3-4 years, or in this campaign. I've been in and out of squads, but I've understood my place. I've got a lot of respect for Arnie and his communication throughout, and when I've been called up, when I haven't. And I guess I've always, he's always asked me to show my leadership and just be who I am. So I've always done that, although, I would have liked to have done it more on the pitch, but here I am now, play these games and qualify for World Cup. So, I'm extremely hungry to be part of the group that gets selected, and I know there's a lot of work to do from now till then, but I know, how much it hurts not getting selected, and like I said, I'll just use that.
There's a lot to unpack there, and that Burke van Marwijk appointment is probably an interesting standalone case study in itself that we might leave for another occasion. But the last two World Cup qualification campaigns, of course, you came in just before Brazil. I remember speaking to your old man. You were the shock, the selection bolter, the boy from Langwarrin, who went overseas at a young age, and we kind of lost tabs on you. But going through the two World Cup qualification cycles, what have you learnt? What have we learnt in Australian football that we can perhaps, take forward and improve on?
It's a good question, and it's hard to sort of pinpoint anything. And I guess what we've spoken a lot about is progressing our game, and we want to improve our game. And like JD said, we've got a massive opportunity now that we won't get again. We've got a men's World Cup coming up and the women's World Cup here on home soil, which is special. And this can drive a generation. This can drive football, similar to what John said with the States. It absolutely drove the game on, and we've got an opportunity to do that. And I guess it's not letting that opportunity slip away. It's maximising any opportunity we can get. And we all have a responsibility, all of us involved in the game, as players, as anyone involved in clubs, coaches, to really drive it on and inspire the next generation of boys and girls, because we've got so much potential here, and we've shown, we've qualified for 5 World Cups from a men's point of view in a row, which is special. And, we're a match for anyone, and it frustrates you to see sometimes how you can get written off as Aussies abroad. And it's great to see what Ange is doing, pioneering the way for, Australian football, for coaches in general, to show that, we've got some really good coaches here that are much better than a lot of coaches that I've experienced in Europe, that, sometimes struggle to get a chance. And we want to develop our game for players, for coaches, so that, in years to come, we're a top team, because as a nation, our culture, our upbringings, we're winners. I think we have winning mentalities from a young age as part of our upbringings. And I think that's why our game has been so successful, and we have an opportunity to push that on. And, all the success that's happened up till now, we can't let it go to waste. We have to maximise it and really push everything forward, because, it's a great opportunity that we might not get again.
when you listen to Bailey, I've had conversations with you and seen a lot of commentary about you as well around the Matildas. Can you just talk to us about, I guess, some of the heartaches for you, because you've had a lot of challenges as well yourself when it comes to international football, and also tell us what it is like to wear a Matildas shirt, a national team shirt.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, I got brought in at a really young age. So my first senior national team camp, I was 16 years old, and I think it probably has actually taken me up until recently, almost 10 years on from that, to really appreciate and understand what that meant at that time. And I think, I mean, obviously part of it was women's football was in a different place then. It wasn't, it wasn't regarded as highly as it is now. It wasn't on the same pedestal. So in one sense, I didn't have the same level of pressure on me more broadly. But I guess the flip of that was that I didn't always handle the pressure as well as I could have, because I don't think any 16-year-old is quite, emotionally ready or mature enough to actually be in an environment like that and deal with the difficulties of it. And it was, I am so grateful that I was exposed to it at that time, and it gave me, that hunger to stay at that level and to really push to have a career in that team. But I think that, it's harder to stay there than getting there in a way. So, and that's something I have struggled with. I've been in and out for over a decade now since that, and I've really struggled to, cement a spot in the team. And I think, I am at a point in life where now I know as long as I'm giving everything I can, and it sounds cliche, but that's all I can control. And I think I've made peace with that in knowing that every decision I make, whether it be to move abroad or whether it is coming home, because I feel like that's also best, is in line with my goal to play at a tournament like a World Cup and to get a more, concrete position in the team. So I think, sometimes even still I underestimate the challenge that it has brought, because it's really hard having that lack of stability. And I think even though you can't assume that you're going to be picked, just the constant unknown of, you do start to doubt yourself, and you almost want to prepare for the worst sometimes so that it hurts less. But I think, Bailey touched on it, the reality is it hurts regardless, and the excitement when you do get picked on that, so no matter how many times you get picked, is still as high. So it's like we're talking the highest of highs with the lowest of lows, and there's no in between. It's you're either picked or you're not. So it's cutthroat. And I think even though it's been one of the hardest parts of my career, it's also one thing that's driven me the most, is the uncertainty pushes me every day, because, it's like I'm chasing certainty, but also the knowing that it won't come keeps pushing you through.
So where are you at right now? And casting forward to the 2023 World Cup, obviously there are more unique challenges for the women's players, between playing home and abroad and all that kind of stuff. Can you just tell us where you're at and what you're thinking ahead of 2023?
Yeah, I mean, for me, my year has turned out already to be very different to what I planned. My intention was to be playing overseas at the moment, but then unfortunately, basically in the week that I was preparing to sign a contract, I tore my meniscus. So instead of being on a plane, I was in a hospital bed getting surgery. So it was, a pretty big turnaround. But again, this is football, this is sport, and it's something that you're constantly adapting and adjusting to unknown things that can appear. And I think for me, it's actually been a really good blessing, and I've tried to see every injury that I've had in that way, in the sense that it's given me an opportunity to reevaluate where I'm at, and what's important to me, and also what I actually need to do in terms of my career moving forward. And, sometimes when you're jumping between seasons and leagues and games, you don't actually have the clarity to see what decisions you need to make. And I think for me, this has given me that chance. And so my goal is to end up back overseas in the next transfer window. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I am open to those options. And, then obviously the reality is our league is growing here as well. So it's a win-win, whatever happens. But my big goal is obviously to be a part of the World Cup squad next year.
Mm-hmm. JD, over to you. You've done a lot of work, as we mentioned, with the PFA, particularly in the women's space. Too many studies and proposals to mention. Not many of them have seen or saw the light of day, but what are your thoughts on the women's space and where we're at and where we need to go moving forward?
Look, I still think it's the biggest opportunity that we have. Our ability to be on a podium at an Olympic Games or to lift the ultimate trophy still sits, all things being equal, in women's football. But that's, the question I ask myself sometimes is, are we closer today than we were 5 years ago? And, I think there's a debate whether we are or not. Mm-hmm. My big frustration sometimes with the way women's football is perceived is I still have a sense that it's, I'll frame this in the most diplomatic way, but it can sometimes be tokenistic, or we push the women out when we've got a government announcement to make sure we get the funding. But what's actually sitting behind that to make sure that we're creating the proper pathway for girls and women to become their absolute best? And I'm not convinced that we do that. So we have a World Cup, as we know, coming up in 12 months' time. Yet Emma still doesn't know when she's playing her next game of football. As soon as we got, and I speak about Emma because I've known Emma and tracked her career for a long period of time, she's had this disjointed, fragmented life for how many years now, Emma? 5, 10, 11 years, living sometimes in Melbourne, sometimes elsewhere in Australia, sometimes overseas, in Iceland, here, there and everywhere. And they do it themselves. They do it themselves because they're driven to succeed. That's not something where somebody sits down with them and charts a path to say, okay, here's how you're going to be an Australian international. They're left to their own devices to build their own career, to pay their own rent, to survive hand to mouth every single week, and then they're asked to put on the green and gold and become world champions. And I think that's incredibly unfair. So we've had this opportunity over the past couple of years, knowing we've got a World Cup, to build, for example, a 12-month calendar. So we can say we're going to play 12 months of football. We're going to join the state competitions with the national competitions. We're going to have these tournaments. We're going to actually make sure that the Emma Checkers of the world, the Alex Chidiacs of the world, all these players who are sitting maybe players 16 to 30 or 40 have got somewhere so they can challenge the best players we've got, and we build a depth in our squad, and we can maybe win the World Cup one day. But that's never the discussion. It's never about how do we actually build a critical mass of players who can be the best in the world. It always tends to be, okay, how do we raise more money for pitches? It becomes this, I just think...
Vicious cycle?
It does, because I think what we do, we shift the onus of becoming world champions onto the player and her family and her partner, as opposed to actually, as a game, creating the sort of structures that will allow our women to be world champions. And I see it so often, so many tweets and pictures with whoever, and they trot out the token female to make sure, hey, how good are we? But it doesn't solve the problem, which is we're still not creating careers for women quickly enough.
Talking about it broadly, moving forward, there's a lot of positions to fill in Australian football at FFA, with technical directors and whatnot. Post World Cup cycles, you tend to change coaches. Moving forward, what are your thoughts about Australian football in terms of how we approach this next phase?
Look, I think one of Australia's big issues is this Messiah complex, is that we're going to hire a coach or a player or an administrator, and they've got a magic wand and they're going to come in and they're going to solve everyone's problems. That's not going to happen. So I think the biggest step we need to take is culturally, so that we actually value ourselves a lot more. We have a boldness in the way we speak about football and the way we manage football. And that's what I loved about what the Socceroos achieved, is that they took it to Peru, no problem, and they beat them. That's why Ange Postecoglou has been successful, because he hasn't allowed himself to be weighed down by the fact he's Australian. He doesn't have a cringe about where he's come from. He's proud of his background. He's built this universe and this pathway for himself. And as Bailey said, these coaches, without a shadow of a doubt, Ange Postecoglou, Tony Popovich's, they are better than the majority of coaches who are working in Europe. I've got no doubt, having observed all these different environments. Absolutely no doubt. So once these coaches are given the opportunity, we'll see the expertise that exists within Australian football. Yet we here consistently discount how good we are. And that needs to change. And that's not about, false bravado. It's about actually being authentic with ourselves and saying we've actually helped build so many wonderful footballers, so many wonderful coaches. But I go one step further and say that soccer's helped us build this wonderful Australian culture, this Australian society that we live in with 150 nationalities and 130 languages and suburbs throughout Melbourne, Sydney and Adelaide and Geelong and wherever else that bind together these incredibly powerful communities. A lot of that's been driven by football. So let's be proud of it, let's embrace it, and let's use that as the sort of nebulous, invisible strength that ties us together so that hopefully we can become a genuine football nation.
And that was the crux of the Football Belongs idea, wasn't it? The book and the eventual podcast series.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I look at Australia and I see football. Not many people do. People tend to compartmentalise their life as an Australian and their life as a football fan. So, okay, I'm going to be an Australian today, which means I've got to ask someone who their AFL team is, who do you barrack for in the footy. I've got to ask someone, okay, what do you think of Neighbours? That's my Australian persona that exists Monday to Friday. And then on the weekend, I have this secret society that I attend. And I'm going down to the soccer and we're chanting in a different language and we're talking shit to our Greek mates and all that sort of stuff. That all happens and that's the real us. And then on Monday comes again and you turn back into you become Australian. And I wondered why that was the case, is why soccer was so included from what I considered to be mainstream Australian life, when every single context I was in reminded me of soccer. So if I went to work, I saw, if I was at the soccer, I saw girls playing, guys playing, different races, different religions, different cultures, all coming together supporting the teams. I go to work, I'd see exactly the same. I go to High Point, I'd see exactly the same. When I go and watch an AFL game, I've got a very homogenous group of young men that I'm watching. Predominantly Anglo, predominantly private school educated. I go to the cricket, it's even worse. So how are these people reflective of Australia? Yet it's soccer's the ones who are the outsiders. So I needed to really explore that for myself. So I think once we get a sense of how powerful football's been in shaping this nation, forming it, making it, this wonderful but imperfect country, then I think our football can actually build on the shoulders of that and become, and this is why I'm talking too much, but
go for it, JD.
Until we, because of that, football is the sport of national significance. And unless we're a sport of national significance, we can't achieve anything. And the two things that can help us become a sport of national significance are sitting right here, the Socceroos and the Matildas. And if they do well, everyone in Australia will see themselves in those teams and we'll become the sport that we're destined to be. But that's why the success, why Redders save was so important. And that's the fine lines that we live by, which is incredible. A torn meniscus or a penalty save is a fine line between us being the nation we can be or once again becoming baseball or softball or basketball. And I think football's bigger and better than that.
One of the chapters touches on the Matildas getting equal. Can you just touch on that and also tell us how the 2023 version of the Matildas can be trailblazing?
In 2015, the Matildas went on strike they didn't go on strike. They were locked out because they wouldn't accept the payments that were on offer from the Federation. So they were offered about $25,000 a year to play for the Matildas. And I think when I speak to the players now, they said it was never about the money, it was about our ability to be professional footballers. The chance to actually say, okay, I can now focus on playing my football. And they did that in 2015, they took a stand. They had a game in America called off, so they're due to play in Detroit in September 2015. Game didn't go ahead, there was like 60 or 70,000 tickets that had been sold. So a lot of those Matildas, I don't know if you would have been in that squad, Emma, but a lot of those Matildas missed the chance of a lifetime. And they did it because they felt they needed to take a stand, not only for women footballers, but women athletes across Australia. And that very much reflected of what women had to do for decades and decades and decades before that, where they've had to take this really visceral public stand against what they perceived to be injustice. And on the back of 2015, we saw the Matildas get a pay rise. We saw equal pay a few years later. But importantly, it set this chain reaction through Australian sport and potentially Australian life around gender equality. So the AFLW was pushed forward and started. Rugby League started the same thing, rugby union. And without the Matildas stand, I don't think any of the advances that have been made in women's sport would have happened. Okay? Internationally, yeah. So not even just in Australia, then globally it had this ripple effect. And I think 2023 has got the potential to have a similar impact, not just the empowerment of women, but again, displaying football in all its beauty and saying, okay, we are genuinely this thread that runs through everybody's life throughout the world. It connects us all. So if we do a good job there, it can actually, who knows, the positive outcomes are infinite.
I don't think people realise how big this 2023 World Cup's going to be. It will be massive. It's the biggest ever.
Has anyone been to a World Cup here? Put your hands up. Put your hand up if you've been to a World Cup. Who's from Melbourne? Okay. My experience is the way I describe it to people. Yeah. Being at a World Cup is like having 3 AFL Grand Finals every day for 2 weeks. That's what it felt like to me. Like when I was in Germany and the other World Cups and in France. Like every morning you wake up and there's this anticipation. It's amazing. Yeah. So I think people underestimate the energy that's going to be unlocked. Yeah. Through this tournament.
Yeah, it'll be massive. Emma, if you want to give us an insight into the 2023 World Cup and how big it'll be, it's, by all accounts, the last World Cup was one where FIFA really threw all their resources into it. It's grown to a 32-team tournament. You're going to have 50, 60,000 US fans travelling over to watch their national team. How big will this be and how do we capitalise on it?
I think it's actually really hard to imagine how big it really is. And I think, one, because obviously I haven't been to a World Cup before, but also two, just because this is one of the biggest sporting events out of any code that we will ever host. And I think, one thing that's really exciting for me is if in terms of fans coming, like Australia is a very appealing place to travel to. Like we are not going to struggle in terms of fan base. Every game will have atmosphere. It won't even just be the Australian games. Like this tournament will bring people worldwide together. And I mean, I could be biased, but I would say that it could be one of the biggest women's World Cups that we've ever seen. And I think, there is no better time in football, especially in women's football, to host a tournament like this. And I think leveraging this opportunity is everything. And I mean, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't somewhat scared of how well we are going to leverage it, because I think, JD touched on it, that it worries me a little bit that we're not quite using the time at the moment to really make the most of it. But, there still is time, and I think that we need to use this as a turning point, and we need to have structures in place that position not only women but girls coming through in a place that they can be on a pathway towards being part of tournaments like that. And I think that the pathways could do some work. And now is the time to do that work, because this is when there's going to be no better time for young girls to be engaged in being part of women's football.
Sam Kerr, massive profile. Thereafter, respectfully, it probably drops off a fair bit, certainly in terms of the mainstream, quote unquote, media. What do we need to do? How do we build out the profiles of the rest of the Matildas squad and the Australian female players?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've actually thought a lot about, not even just in that sense, but more in terms of how we can utilise, the reality is, social media and media platforms now to have more reach. And I think, technology has changed so much over the last few years. And I think for me, without being critical, I think we're a little bit behind in the way that we are actually reaching particularly kids. I mean, kids are on TikTok, kids are on Instagram, and that's what they are seeing every single day. And I think a lot of our media forms aren't targeted towards what kids are seeing. And it's all well and good to target the adults and the parents who drive them, but kids are the ones that actually really push for those added numbers. And I think we need to get a little bit more creative, and in terms of kids being exposed to seeing, and like we've spoken about this, kids need to feel like they know players. And we've started to know Sam Kerr, but we need to know more. And I think that there are ways that we can utilise media streams for kids to actually feel like they know players beyond just them being in a jersey on the field. And that can build a relationship without a kid having even met that player. And I think having that knowing of who a player is as a person as well as just a player creates, it creates a role model, an idol, and you have more of an image and a connection to the player then.
Very good. A few more questions and then we'll open it up to you guys if you wanted to ask the crew up here any from the floor. But Bailey, I wanted to get your views over in the UK. Certainly noticed a massive spike in terms of the women's game and the coverage of it, and a lot of our Matildas players are front and centre, including Sam Kerr, Steph Catley, Kaya Simon, Lydia Williams, etc. What's it been like from your vantage point?
Yeah, I think it's brilliant to see the game grow so much as it has done, and we've got some of the girls playing in some of the best teams in the world, massive clubs like Sam Kerr at Chelsea that have won absolutely everything, and like we've just said, Emma's just said there about how she's such a face of football in Australia, is incredible, and we want to see more of that being achieved. So what she's done is incredible, and you want to see more of that happening. And the women's game, I think this year in England's broke records for attendances at Wembley for the FA Cup final. We've had, hate kills me to say it because Newcastle, the rival, has been obviously playing at Sunderland, but Newcastle just announced this year that they're going to have a women's team. And the first game they played at St James, the stadium there, was a record, the first game. And it just shows you that the potential of the women's game worldwide has not been tapped into properly. It's going to grow and grow and grow. And as Emma said, this World Cup coming up in 12 months' time has got the potential to be the biggest and best ever, potential to break records, inspire generations for years and years to come, and to sort of make you not forget, but sort of, I don't know, pinch yourself and look how far the game can go. In 10 years' time, you might never have believed that, the game was so far behind now. Men and women in Australia of what it can get to. So I think it's come a long way. It's got a long way to go, and I think, as a member of the Socceroos and a member of the Matildas, the togetherness and the responsibility we have to grow the game, and events like this, I think, are brilliant. You can, like you say, whack things on Instagram and make sure the young generation are seeing it, because the generation of want things instantly and social media, and you see everything instantly, and I think we have a responsibility to do more as individuals and the collective. And as Emma said, it's not too late to really start pumping things out and getting it out there to show, what sort of event can be held here, because it is the biggest event that can be held, full stop, sport, whatever it might be. A World Cup's massive, and it's, I can only imagine as a kid, if I had that growing up, I would have been absolutely buzzing. As JD said, it's like going to 3 grand finals in one day. And I've never been to a grand final, like Aussie rules, but I can imagine it's pretty good. I've been to a World Cup, and the buzz of what that is and what it does to a community and culturally and brings people together. So on so many levels, it is so important, and we all have an opportunity to really progress it.
I want to touch on culture quickly. And speaking of content, Sunderland Till I Die, Netflix series. Hands up if you've seen that. There you go, all the way in Australia. Unbelievable series. Can you just talk to us about the legacy of that series? Although pretty much as you signed, that's as the cameras were turning off on the documentary.
I think it's a really good documentary. I obviously watched it before I went there and kind of just wanted to see what I was in for. But it just made me want to go more because they're crazy. Honestly, the support, everything you get at that football club is next level. The passion, and I've said recently, you know, obviously watching the documentary, you get a little taste of what it's about and how much the football club means to fans and the city and the community. But then you move there, and then I've played for 3 clubs in my time in England. I've played for Preston, that I hold fondly. I had a great time there, and moved to Bristol City, again a big club, and I went to Sunderland, and it was a complete different beast. And the reason it was a different beast was because of the fan base. And we had a historian come in and speak to us in pre-season, which Lee Johnson, our previous gaffer, got him in to speak to us. And at first you're kind of like, oh, we've got to listen to a historian. And some boys are a bit like, what's this guy doing? And then you sit there and you listen to him speak so passionately and tells us the history of Sunderland. And you know, Sunderland was known for 3 things: shipyards, mining, and the football team. And when financial crisis hit and things went downhill, the shipyards closed and the mining industry all shut down like that, which meant families lost their incomes, and it was completely gone. Those 2 things were gone, but what never left Sunderland as a town was the football club, and which is why it means so much to everyone. Whilst they went through the tough times, their kids saw their mum and dads lose their jobs, and saw what it meant, and it was difficult to be able to afford and make a living in anything. So then the football club is what everyone went to. It's where they had a sense of community, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. And when I remember listening, and all of us were absorbed in the conversation and what the historian had to say. I should remember his name. I do know his name. But what he had to say, and we were all sort of taken aback, and it kind of summed up what we felt from the fans as players and what you feel from the football club. And it kind of strengthened our connection. And I think going on this season, we average crowds of 35,000, which, is a bit like our 12th man. Last season we won a full season without anyone watching. And this season we had everyone in. Everyone was there and able to watch every game. And, I think that's a large part of why we got promoted. And, had that documentary been filmed this season, I think it would have been pretty special. You would have seen a group of professionals at a football club wanting the club to get promoted and a connection with the fans. And, when you weren't performing and you weren't giving your 100%, they're the first to tell you. And, I remember we were sitting, I think, second in the league at Christmas around that time. We were 0-0 at half-time and got booed off. And I'm like, we're second in the league here, 0-0, getting booed off. I'm like, these have high standards. We went on to win the game, and they were delighted. But a tackle can get them up. Yeah. As long as you're giving 100% and they're enjoying it, they'll back you through anything. If you don't give 100%, then they don't want to borrow you. So I think it's one of those clubs where it's special to play for. And watch that documentary. I'll become a fan watching it. I speak to Arnie, and Arnie was like, I love Sunderland, loved it. Like, he became a fan watching it. I think a lot of people in here who've watched it probably have a little bit of a soft spot for the club because the fans are so passionate. You get like a sense of, you want them to do well, and I had that going there, and it feels special to achieve what I've achieved with them. So I'm glad I went.
Any chance they fire it up again?
I don't know. I think it was all under the old ownership, which was, it's probably been a good few years now, so I have no idea. There's a lot of great documentaries coming out now, and some are quite raw, and I don't think many can compare to that one because it was really unique. So
they tried to kick them out midway through the first season when they were in a relegation scrap. I think the plan was to film them going back up into the Premier League, but didn't go to plan.
Yeah, I think a lot didn't go to plan, to be honest. It was crazy. Crazy few years for a club of that size, and to get promoted, obviously, it's great now that it's had some success because there's a lot of tough times, and I don't think it was easy for anyone having that documentary get filmed when, I know we can speak from a player's point of view. When you lose, you don't want to speak to anyone. Yeah. Go on the training ground, have cameras in your face. I can't imagine anything worse. So it would have been tough.
Just quickly, what can we learn in Australia? I mean, A-League started in 2005, the NSL started in 97, Socceroos are 100 years old. What can we learn in Australia from clubs like Sunderland?
I think JD's touched on it perfectly before, and football and culture and society, and it can bring people together from so many diverse backgrounds, different communities, and you can come together to support one team. And I think we've got Newcastle up the road, they're the rivals, and you have that rivalry, which I think is also healthy. But everyone in that town, come a Saturday, it'll be, if it's a home game, it's like ghost town. Everyone's there supporting their team. Whatever troubles are in the week, whatever troubles you have at home, you can go to your football and feel a sense of belonging. And I think we need to utilise that more here. I know growing up in Langy, I lived on the same road as the soccer club, Barrett's Road, Dirt Road, and I used to love going down. Whenever I could, take my football down, have a kick around in the club rooms and mingle and chat and make friends and kick a ball around all day. And that was when I was at my happiest. I loved playing football, soccer, and that was just down my road, and it was like a release from everything. I'd play on the weekends, and I just loved it, and I knew how important that was for me. And I think we can really, galvanise that and combine it together, and really create those communities and that sense of belonging all over, because we have that, of course we do, but I think we need to utilise it and be proud of it, I think, which is a massive part too.
Emma, I just want to get your thoughts on Angel City FC. I mean, US soccer, women's soccer, has blazed a trail in the cultural space. Angel City FC, what they've done is phenomenal. Natalie Portman, one of the founders, and a ridiculous A-list group of owners. Just quickly, you've got a connection there, and if you could talk to, again, how we could perhaps learn from something like that over here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in short, they've just nailed it. And I mean, again, talking of records, they've smashed through so many already. And I think for an expansion team to come in and do what they've done is just unbelievable. And yeah, a friend of mine has been a big part of doing that. And I think the way that they have engaged the community is quite unique. And I think we have to respect and appreciate how much work that did actually take. It's not, you don't gain the support of the community just naturally. You have to actually put work into it. And I think the way they've done that is really special, and they've connected in a really diverse way. They've given people a sense of belonging, and being a part of that football club that is how people feel, and people are speaking about and reflecting upon their experience. And the club already in its first season, they have 6 official support groups that people can join based on what's important to them. And so they're already creating communities within one bigger community. And so everyone has a place. And I think that shows the power of how football can bring people together. And I think, the way they've done it, like I said, it is unique, but I think we can learn a lot from it, because if you do invest in a way where people are out connecting on a personal level in the community, it changes everything. And I've seen what my friend has done over there, and she was connecting on a personal level with people every single day for months and tirelessly. And, that takes a lot of effort and commitment to achieve what they have. And all it takes is a couple of people committing to that, that pathway, and that's where they've ended up, and it grows. And you might start with 1 or 2 people who do commit to that, but then once you get buy-in from others, it naturally starts to grow. So I just think it's, we have to commit really heavily to start with, and then just expand from there. But I think we can definitely learn a lot from what Angel City have done. It's been incredible.
Yeah, I mean, unbelievable list of owners: Christina Aguilera, Mia Hamm, Abby Wambach, Kobe Jones, Eva Longoria, etc., etc. But yeah, you probably hear about that kind of stuff a little bit less. JD, cultural cringe, one of your chapters in the book. It was an intriguing one, but yeah, when you hear that, when you look at the last couple of weeks with the Socceroos and everything that's happened, what springs to mind through a cultural lens?
I'll just echo what Emma was saying about Angel City. Following their progress has been staggering, but there's so much authenticity that's wrapped up in that organisation, and that's what I think resonates with people, is that they had a really clear vision for what they wanted to achieve, and they're unfailingly sticking to that and bringing it to life. And it's just wonderful to watch. In terms of what you mentioned around this notion of cultural cringe, in essence, cultural cringe is where we devalue who we are and we defer to what exists externally. So, player A plays in the A-League, no good, he's crap because he plays in the A-League. Player B is playing in Europe, he must be good. Okay, so we just make that value judgment. Now, it happens in a whole range of Australian cultural pursuits. So it happens in TV, it happens in movies, happens in music. So you're not really a good musician until you've made it in the States. Or your movie's not actually good unless it breaks into the US box office. That sort of dynamic, and happens a lot in Australia. And I think, it's sort of anchored back to our colonial past, I think, a lot. But I think that's something we have to break in Australia, is that where we consistently devalue in football, and it really only happens in sporting context, in football to some degree, but we really need to stop devaluing what we do here in Australia. And again, it's not about having false bravado or putting ourselves on a pedestal. It's just about deeply believing that if we do the right things, if we're authentic, if we believe in the power of football as expressed in Australia in building this great multicultural nation, we can achieve incredible things. If football can help us build this great country, it can also, we can also achieve great things on the pitch. And I think that's one of the key thresholds that we need to get across. And one of the example I use in my book is a guy called Paul Trimboli, who I work with now. And Paul was this incredible player. So he might be too old for some of the people here. But the guy was a genius on the field. But he never really wanted to go to play in Europe, because at that stage, he was an accountant, he's playing in South Melbourne, he's probably making more money between those two jobs than he would have got in a club in Europe. So he never went there. But he was never been put on the same level as any of the guys who came in the golden generation, for example, or Ned Zalic or Paul Ocon, purely because he never played in Europe. Yet he played, more Socceroo games, and I think he scored more Socceroo goals than, say, Viduka, Bresciano and someone else combined. But because he never left to play in Europe, he's never given any sense of esteem. So I think it's really about trying to shift that discussion of being proud of who we are and what we can do as a football nation.
Two people who are blazing a trail, Ange Postecoglou, Joe Montemuro.
Yep.
Just a line on them and how we, as Australian football, can capitalise.
No, I think they just demonstrate that if you actually build your own universe and you build your own pathway, you're good enough. It's as simple as that. They have a deep self-belief and they've pursued it.
Emma, your thoughts, and I guess particularly Joe over at Juventus, who's doing amazing things.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to actually be coached by Joe when I was at Melbourne Victory a number of years back, and I think the reality is it's not a coincidence that he's had that same level of success at every club he's been at. He did so well with Victory. He then moved to City and, made massive inroads with the group of girls there, success at Arsenal and now success at Juventus. And it just goes to show the quality of coach that he is. And it's not because he's at quality clubs that have quality players. You still have to be a good enough coach to bring the best out, of your playing group. And much like Ange, he's really showcased that we are producing quality. And I think we need to start giving more credit to what we do produce, not only, coaches and players, because we're obviously doing a lot of things right, and it is time, like JD said, that there is a shift in the way that we are viewing that.
Yeah, Tanya Rocks to be assistant coach at Chelsea, who are flying. Kevin Muscat top of the table at Yokohama, F. Marinos, etc., etc. Harry Kewell now joining Postecoglou at Celtic. Last one for you, Bailey. Ange over at Celtic. He's doing all right, isn't he? What's it like over there? Bit of a buzz. From your vantage point, and what was he like to play under?
Yeah, obviously, Ange for me, giving my debut, and obviously worked and played a lot of games under him, and I loved and learnt so much from him. He's the way he looked at football, what he wanted for the game, and his self-belief. As we've said, both them coaches there, to do what they've done requires so much self-belief, and I think they want to be valued for who they are and what they bring, and not be judged, as we quite often see, of their background, because quite often as Aussies we can get written off. But Ange, that seemed to fuel him. He always had, whenever anyone asked him a question, he seemed to never let people would ask him questions he didn't agree with. He'd never answer those questions because he just didn't see the point. You know, he always controlled the narrative because he knew what he wanted from the game. He didn't want people putting words in his mouth because he had the belief of what he was going to create. And he's done that over there. I remember sitting in my car, I listen to Talk Sport, unfortunately, in the mornings, and some of the crap that's on there is incredible. And Alan Brazil, who's like the host of it, come on, and he was so disrespectful the way he spoke about Ange, about Celtic appointing him. He's obviously a Rangers fan, unfortunately for him. And the way he spoke, wound me up. I wanted to call up and like give him a bit on the phone on the radio show.
Been gold.
And I remember thinking, Ange would love that, like love what he's just heard, because he'd be like, I can't wait to shut him up. That's the sort of guy he was, and he has done that. He's shut up a lot of people who have no choice now but to admire a job he's done there, because he had a big job to do. Yeah. He went to a big club and had a massive job. You can't underestimate winning a league, but doing what he's done. But I think anyone who knows him, anyone that's worked with him, what he's achieved here for Australian football, for the country, in the A-League, and now he's done it in the J-League and done it in Scotland at one of the biggest clubs in the world that have a passionate fan base. And I think he had a way of connecting. He said something when a reporter asked him about the Japanese players he's been signing, and he sort of stopped the reporter and sort of just said, like, they're completely different individuals and you have to value them for who they are, not just where they've come from. And I think that's, sort of a great representation of who he is and how he sort of judges each person for who they are, regardless of whatever it might be. Everyone's equal, and that's, a big part of his philosophy. And it's great to see him do what he's done, because I think it will inspire a lot of coaches and certainly a lot of players that may be looking for coaching after football, which, it'd be great to see a lot more doing that, getting involved, and, with more opportunities, more careers getting carved out. And a few years down the line, we'll hopefully have a lot more coaches here in Australia as well, and in the A-League, and all over the world.
I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much for listening so attentively, and thanks for joining us for the inaugural Ultra Football Technical Area discussion. Stay tuned for more details on the upcoming discussions and events that will be coming up in the next few months. Thanks again, and thanks to our esteemed panel for joining us.